You're listening to the Garden Cinema podcast. The Garden Cinema is currently playing host to some of the screenings from Black to the Future, a multimedia Afrofuturist festival celebrating outstanding Black artists. It launched late October and is running until US Black History Month in February 2024. It will accompany the British Library's upcoming major exhibition, Fantasy: Realms of Imagination. I'm really pleased to be speaking to its curator, Nigerian-British writer Irenosen Okojie, who was just this year named a visionary artist in Red Magazine's The Next 25 Visionaries to Watch. Thank you so much, Irenosen, for joining us. You are the curator of this project, and we are screening a number of films. And can you tell us a bit more about Black to the Future?
Hi, Abla. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I love the Garden Cinema, so I'm a little bit giddy with excitement to be on here. And a huge shout out to Sarah Ville as well, who's our creative director at Black to the Future. Yes, so I'm the director, founder, and curator of Black to the Future. The idea came several years ago, actually, because I was thinking about futurism and I was thinking about Black stories, which is something that fascinates me endlessly since I am of African descent. And I'm a novelist and short story writer myself. And I would consider myself an experimental writer. So I'm always curious about how we can explore Black stories in ways that feel really interesting and exciting, but also in ways that give us agency. And it occurred to me that this area of Afrofuturism, which I had been intrigued by actually for years, and had been aware of, and had read writers who'd operated in that genre, that this was a great space to really unpick that and to explore stories around the Black diaspora, but not just how we think about ourselves now in the present, but also looking to the past to draw inspiration from those past experiences diasporically, and then thinking about the ways we anchor ourselves in the future. So it just felt like a brilliant space to do that. And I had some ideas. I scribbled them down excitedly, just thinking about the kind of mediums I would like to curate for. At the time, I had met Sarah Ville, who was then, I think, marketing head at Clean Space. And we really hit things off. We stayed in touch. I told her about the project. She was really excited about it, which was great for me because I thought, oh, brilliant. I'm not the only one that's excited about this. So it really started from that point. And the intention for me, I think, was to say, okay, there are all these conversations about diversity. There are all these conversations about, what people of color need, and who are the gatekeepers and who are those people that can make things happen. Well, it occurred to me that I also have agency. I also now have um you know a sense of what's possible, having been an artist for some years. So how can I use that to open the space up? So that was the intention behind it. And Sarah and I met several times just to check that our intentions aligned, because that was important to me. And she really understood that. And she's just absolutely fantastic. You've met her. And she's full of ideas and highly creative as well, which I was impressed by. So it felt like, okay, we can really do something interesting here. Sorry, that was a really long response to your answer, but essentially that's where it came from.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And you mentioned a number of media. So the idea initially wasn't just to use film.
No, it was literature. Literature was the starting point because that's my comfort zone. Yeah, absolutely. So instinctively, I jotted down ideas around that, potential writers and artists that we could program for that. But no, also film, to be fair, was part of that too, because I love cinema. I love the medium of cinema and what it can do and how amazing a space it is to, explore the human condition. So Sarah and I both love films. So that was always on the table as something, to curate for. Yeah. And then it just kind of grew and grew, really. It was initially supposed to be a weekend takeover at our sort of first conversations. then we brought another collaborator on board, Elliot Jack, who runs the Book Slam Nights, brilliant producer in his own right. In fact, quite legendary actually in the creative scene for what he's done. So we were really excited to get him on board too, and have his contribution and his influence in terms of what we can do. So yeah, it really started from that point. But I love film. Film inspires me a lot in terms of my writing, like looking to that medium for how you shape stories, but also how you shape stories with a less amount of time
Yeah.
and learning the tricks from that. So yeah, I'm super excited to think about a film program and what was possible with that.
That's why I wanted to explore the specific issues that you wanted to discuss. So you talked about exploring the ways in which the black diaspora anchors itself in the future. Concretely, what are we talking about? What are the discussions that need to take place around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what sort of stories are we allowed to tell, really?
Yeah.
What sort of genres are we allowed to operating? I think for me at the time, there was some frustration because I felt like, in publishing, yes, there are more voices being published, and predating that, there weren't really a lot of us being published. And you could see like that there was a sense of limitation with some of the stories, writing about migration and all of that's important and all of that's necessary and all of that's vital. But what about detective stories? What about romance stories? What about sci-fi stories from Black writers? I just wasn't seeing that at the time, So that was the point of frustration, that I know these voices are out there, and we're just not bringing them into the center enough. And also, if we do celebrate them and we give them space, that opens up the space for other people who may not have thought, oh, I've never thought about writing in that genre. I've never thought about writing within fantasy. That's really exciting, So this is why I felt it was really, really important to have this program, because yes, it's happening, but not to the extent that I would like to see, and I think would really invigorate, um, the landscape.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you make. I've experienced something slightly similar in this, as I tend to curate films from the Arab world. And there's this
Mm,
expectation that films from that region have to be, I'd say, solely, I don't want to use political because political can mean a lot of things,
mm,
have to address certain issues. And beyond that, they are not considered necessarily vectors for pure entertainment.
mm,
And we're seeing now a real growth in genre films that tackle politics, that tackle the issues that affect people's lives, but they're done through the prism of horror. Lots of
mm.
horror films. I'm a big horror fan myself. Thrillers and comedy and the like. So that's interesting that you say this, and this presumably is what guided your selection of films. So can you tell us a bit more about the films you picked and why you wanted to show these?
Yeah, for sure. And just to quickly respond to your point, that's absolutely amazing that, in terms of Arab filmmaking, that's starting to open up. Because, like we said, these stories are there. Like the excitement to explore them, to bring them to the screen. We're teeming with them, so it's amazing to see, like you said, horror and comedy and fantasy, to explore stories, women's stories in particular
Yeah.
as well. I think within the Arab world. So yeah, that's really, really exciting. In terms of the films that I selected for this program, yeah, I love voices that are bold. I love voices that dare to be different, and I'm always looking at outliers and outsiders, perhaps because I feel like one myself. And now, having come to this country at the age of 8 and felt like an outsider, I embrace that now. It's taken a long time, but I embrace that now. But in terms of the films, films like Neptune Frost, There's one of the films, Mami Wata, which is directed by CJ Obasi. Very exciting film that's gaining a lot of traction. Sort of modern day fable around, I would say, like African mermaids and being in a female dominated colony. So that's exciting. Hidden Figures, we have a screening of that, which is also, I guess, I would say, exploring like NASA and Black women's role in that. And the part that they played in sending a man up up to space, which is really important. But tied in with that, the aesthetics of Janelle Monáe, who is an incredible artist that crosses genres and boundaries, you know, and mediums. So we're going to be exploring her, and then we're hoping to screen one of Terence Nance's films. And Terence is just wildly experimental, Black American filmmaker, also political, also futuristic, kind of looking at Black American stories, and what it means to be Black and move through the world in this body, you know, but he does it in such interesting, insightful ways, and with elements of flourish that are really striking. So that's what the film program is looking like at the moment.
So you've started screening films, and presumably
Yeah.
you've been having conversations. I'm interested to hear about those conversations and to see whether you said that you came to the UK when you were 8. So from Nigeria, am I correct?
Yes, from Nigeria, from Lagos.
From Lagos. So
Yeah.
technically first generation
Mhm.
immigrant. Were the conversations different according to first generation immigrants from different African countries, kids, adults that are born here from African parents? Are
Mm.
they are people having similar conversations around what it means to be Black in the UK?
Mm.
What conversations we can have what the Black community can have going forwards, and so on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the conversations that are coming up. Yeah, it's fascinating. So far we've screened one film, which was Neptune Frost, which is, yeah, again, sort of wildly experimental and strange. And a lot of the conversation that came up from that was that people didn't know that Black filmmakers were making these kind of films, really. And just the excitement, even if they didn't get it, even if they didn't get the world, the excitement to know that this exists, and that Black stories that can be explored in this way. You know, obviously there were a couple of people in the audience who are aware of writers like Octavia Butler, you know, people who kind of led the way, I think, in terms of Afrofuturism. So that was nice to hear, you know, the acknowledgement of those sort of leaders in the way, trailblazers. But what was also interesting was people saying, making connections. So someone in the audience said, "Oh, I was really into electronic music in the 80s, and this feel Afrofuturism feels like a kind of electronic music that I'm being drawn back into." So it was interesting to hear the comparisons, and it was interesting to hear that there are Black artists now operating in this space, and just the hunger. It's, for me, I was struck by the hunger and the desire to find out more, you know, to know who else is making films that are interesting. What other references can I get? Not just for films, but for books, music, etc. So it was a really organic conversation. And of course, within that, Blackness at the heart of it, but also like a real pride in that now, because very often we know that when we see Blackness reflected on the screen, you know, it can be presented in a way that's problematic. And I think sort of deflating for a lot of us, because we know the joy, we know the creativity in our communities, we know the power that we have and the beauty that we have. So it was nice to see those elements touched upon in the conversations that came up. And also, you know, we talked about the term Afrofuturism, why some people felt that that term was appropriate and some people felt like it's not appropriate, which was also interesting for me to hear. And I thought, this is great. This is actually really, really good because people are thinking about things on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's true. It's
Um,
a term that was just imposed itself, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So when you think about the success of Black Panther, for example, which really changed the game, and I think is a perfect example of Afrofuturism that was commercially viable as well. And like its success was undeniable. It's really interesting to think about how we can continue to expand the genre. And for me, that goes across fantasy, it goes across sci-fi, it goes across romance. It's exciting that there can be multiple iterations of what that looks like. So all of these conversations, yeah, were really exciting.
Speaking of which, were the films in recent years that you thought really that sparked your interest that potentially you just couldn't, for whatever reason, they're not part of this season, but that you think really drive the conversation forward?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. There's a documentary on, I think it's important to understand the history as well, to look back. There's a documentary on Sun Ra, the great Sun Ra musician who did, can you even call it jazz, sonic jazz, travel, time travel, and what he did with music, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And again, really a trailblazer in Afrofuturism and opening up that space. So there are documentaries on him you can watch. There's Julie Dash's film, which I wouldn't necessarily say is specifically Afrofuturism, but I feel like there is a strong connection to it, Daughters of the Dust, in terms of the aesthetic and opening up what you can do on screen. This landscape that she creates with these women and this community that's kind of completely otherworldly. And her work, I think, is really brilliant. Arthur Jafar's work is astonishing. If people don't know who he is, he's not just an astonishing filmmaker, but an amazing thinker, an intellectual powerhouse. So I would recommend his work. I would recommend British director Jen Nkuru, who I don't think a lot of people know about. But she's also done video work. She did some videos for Beyonce, I think. Very, very interesting director and a woman, Black British woman, of Nigerian heritage. So yeah, I would recommend those artists just to start off with, and then you'll fall down a rabbit hole with each one, which is great, which is what you want.
And going forward, what do we have to look forward to in terms of Black to the Future? What's coming up?
Oh my goodness, there is so, so much. So this Friday, we have Genre Marauders at the British Library, a panel of writers and game makers talking about how we move between mediums and debunking, how we explore Black stories around that, which is really exciting. There's the Drexian Realms on the same night, which is the late. So it's a kind of electronic celebration and ode to Drexia, the legacy of Drexia. And that has some great names on the bill, including DJ Josie Rebel, Abdulazim Kazak, all these amazing artists will be there. And it's a party. So, yeah, definitely join us for that. And then we have a party after that as well. So, a secret party. So, there's a lot going on Friday. Coming up on the program, as I mentioned earlier, I would really encourage people to check out our film program, which is very exciting. I particularly want to give a shout out to the Janelle Monáe screening that we have coming up, where myself and Sarah Ville, the co-director at Black to the Future, will be in conversation talking about Janelle's work and her aesthetics. She's an incredible artist, so I think that's particularly exciting if people can make it to that. We have the Kinetic Discourses strand kicking off this December with Adjoa Anjo hosting that. Talking about her interest in the space as well, and the prize that she supports, the Future Worlds Prize. She will be in conversation, so if people could come to that at the Standard Hotel, that would be amazing. Yeah, there's so much. There's loads there. So
There is
yeah, I'd
a
encourage
lot.
everybody to go to the website and have a look, see what strikes your fancy. And obviously, I'll give a shout out to Mami Wata as well, coming up at the stand, coming up at the Garden Cinema, the screening of CJ Abbas's film. I'll be hosting a conversation with him, just deep diving into his process and what inspired the film. It's such a striking movie, and there's a lot of excitement about it. And I think, CJ's a young director that people are really starting to become interested in. So catch him before he becomes a big name. Catch him in conversation with me.
Still within reach.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to end it on this high note, but I do want to ask you about reach. Through this program, ideally, who would you reach? What would your ideal reach be like? And you were talking about gatekeepers earlier. What do you think are the obstacles in the way of reaching a wider audience and of Black artists and writers and filmmakers making this work?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think with gatekeepers, it's really interesting because it's also about them doing the work. I feel it's about them expanding their horizons and their interests and being humble enough to go out there and find different voices, not just wait for them to come to you, because sometimes they don't, because they may not have that confidence, not everybody does. So I think go to nights where there are emerging voices and screenings of aspiring filmmakers, and open mic nights where there are poets and writers, who may not normally have access to you. How do you make yourself more accessible? That's the question that I would throw at them. Think about that. Years ago, when I used to work for an organization called Apples and Snakes, it was a it's a live poetry organization. I was the national development coordinator there, and essentially my role was like a bit of an A&R person, which is to find new talent. And I loved that. That was fantastic. It meant that I would go around the country looking for new voices. And that was a way to find some really interesting dynamic voices that may not have come to us. So that is what I would say to gatekeepers. I think make that extra effort to kind of move beyond your space, make that extra effort to do the work. If inclusivity is on the agenda, and it actively has to be on the agenda, and it has to spill from the top down. If whoever is the head of that organization is not interested in being inclusive, it's not going to be the sort of space that fosters that, or even fosters having conversations around that. Sometimes you go into certain spaces and it's awkward to even have the conversation. So if that's happening, that's a problem. You have to kind of look internally to fix that. So I think these systemic issues, often it's not the people of color's entire responsibility to handle it. That's what I would say. That labor should be shared. In a fair and ideal world, it should be shared. I am very excited to showcase incredible talents across mediums, and that's a joy for me. But I shouldn't just be the only person that like doing that. You know what I mean? I think that it should be, there should be a sense of responsibility, I think, from gatekeepers to do that. I think it's really, really important and vital going forward. And also, actually, it enriches our worlds. It does enrich our worlds. I have always been an inclusive reader. When I was young and I read voraciously, I read everybody from Roald Dahl, to Margaret Atwood, to Chinua Achebe, to all sorts of writers. I was just hungry for amazing voices, and I didn't discriminate. So I find it really frustrating when people say, oh, they're just not on my radar, or I just don't know. They sort of like, no, you do go and do the work. And in terms of reaching audiences, we're very lucky that we have this program running across some iconic spaces in London. And I think that really helps because these spaces bring their own audiences. So the Garden Cinema, for example, is already a favorite iconic space. And I think even though it's, it's like an indie space, already all sorts of people that I have talked to know the Garden Cinema and love it. So I am very hopeful that, that's going to be continue to be a really nourishing, amazing space. Obviously, we're at the British Library, which is one of the biggest venues in the world in terms of being a library. So we're very lucky in that sense, because that's fairly accessible. We've got the Standard Hotel, amazing space. Again, all sorts of travelers and people stay there, and they are going to promote the program. So I think we are reaching wider audiences because of the spaces that we've programmed these events, and not, not every project is lucky enough to have that. So I'm really grateful for that. And I just encourage people to be open-minded, remember that these are human stories, and Black stories are everyone's stories as far as I'm concerned. They're important, just like Arab stories are everyone's stories, like we should be.
They're
Um,
human stories, aren't they?
they're human stories, exactly. So to me, it's a no-brainer. It's like, why wouldn't you want to experience this program? So that's how I would frame it.
That's really good to hear. One of the best things, personally, I think about the Garden Cinema as a venue is this: it's the programming's been very broad, and its reach has been very diverse. So hopefully the idea is we mix audiences. An audience that
Yeah,
might come and watch a Hitchcock classic suddenly becomes accustomed to coming to the Garden Cinema. They might join as members, and then they look through the program. They think, oh, this film's on. It's been promoted by a team who now I trust. I can use my
exactly.
free members ticket. Maybe I'll go watch this, and then conversation
Exactly.
at the bar afterwards. So that's really the idea.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I have to shout out the program at the Garden Cinema as well. It's just brilliant. If you're a film buff, or even, who doesn't enjoy films, but especially if you're a film buff, oh my God, it's like being in the candy store, I think, because I think it's programmed so beautifully and so thoughtfully, and I think so well intentioned. Also, there's a great bar there. There's a
It is
lovely,
very nice.
lovely bar. It's
I will
brilliant.
quote
And
you on this. Thank you
no,
so
seriously,
much. Thank you so much, Irenosen. It's lovely to speaking to you.
it's wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. The time has flown. It's been a delight. We could have talked, I think, for another 2 hours. But no, it's just been wonderful to come on and speak to you about the program and the project. Like, we're so excited. So thank you. Huge thanks to the Garden Cinema for all the support. And we're really thrilled to be working with you guys.